Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the latest in the series of webinars around the Connecting Leeds transport strategy. This has been, I think this is going to be a very popular session. Certainly all of the other webinars that I've attended, we've had a lot of interest in mass transit. I think they wanted to ask questions about mass transit in all of those. So but we've held them off until today, and we've got a great panel with us who should be able to set the scene and hopefully will then be able to answer the questions that are brought forward. Just a bit of housekeeping before I introduce the panel. I think it's really important to use the Q&A function to ask questions. So if you've got a particular question you want to address to the panel, if you use the Q&A function. But we also want to capture all of your comments. We're recording the event, as we've already said, but we'd really like to capture your comments. And therefore, if you can use the chat about anything you want to just add to the thinking, any views that you want to share with the City Council and the Combined Authority, I think that'll be really helpful. I'll just very quickly introduce the panel. We've got with us Paul Foster, who's just going to share some context around the Connecting Leeds transport strategy. He's the head of transport strategy at Leeds. We've got with us Councillor Kim Groves, who's chair of the Combined Authority Transport Committee and a councillor for Middleton Park Ward. We also have with us Tom Gifford, who's the head of mass transit at the Combined Authority, and he's been developing the current plans for West Yorkshire. And we've also with Tom, Ben Still, the managing director, and I think Ben particularly wants to say a few words about yesterday's budget and how that impacts on developing the plans. And we're also fortunate to have with us Danny Vaughan from TfGM. TfGM has the second busiest light rail system in the UK. But it's the biggest. It's the biggest light rail system by route kilometres, and it's also got the longest average trip length. So we'll hear a bit about Manchester Metrolink from Danny. So I'm going to hand over now to Paul Foster, and he's just going to share with you just a bit of context around the transport strategy for Leeds.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Thank you all for joining. Some of you will have seen this a little bit before, but I want to just give a quick intro to those who haven't seen that. There's much more information on the transport strategy, and the other webinars that we've done are on the website. Please go on there, fill in the surveys as well around the transport strategy, so we know the views of everyone in Leeds, and we can be confident that the transport strategy that we deliver or develop up and publish in the summer is one that fits the people of Leeds. Okay, so we've got a vision of a city where you don't need a car, and that's very much about everyone having affordable, low carbon and healthy alternatives for every journey they do. And I really stress that everyone and every journey. So it's about creating a strategy that gives a wide range of transport solutions for people that allow them to travel across the city. Now, this is fitting into our key strategies that we've got in the city in terms of tackling climate change. Transport is a third of all emissions in the city, and so we really need to combat that through travelling less, changing to more low carbon modes, and then decarbonising the transport fleet that is left. Inclusive growth is very much about making sure that everyone in the city has the same opportunities to access jobs, employment, education in the city, and it's about also building a more efficient transport system that reduces the cost of travel for everyone. In terms of health and well-being, we've got to gain as much as we can in terms of the positives, in terms of physical and mental health that we can get from active travel, from walking and cycling. You know, really huge benefits for us all by doing more of that, and at the same time reducing the negative effects that transport and traffic have on our health in terms of the air pollution and also the road casualties. Okay, so moving on. So as I say, the transport strategy sets out 6 big moves, and you can see that they're on the screen. They're across a whole range of elements. And this webinar, we've done a webinar on each of them, or we're going to have done, and you can look at all of those or join them, and it'd be really good to have feedback on each element. Today's the mass transit element, and the key to that is that this needs to be part of that bigger picture, and it needs to integrate with all the other elements of the system that we're going to build across the city. And I hope today you'll hear from colleagues at the Combined Authority and from Danny around how they've done this in Manchester to show how it's a key part of driving those aspirations we've got for transport in the city.
Thank you, Paul. Can I hand over to Councillor Groves, because I think Councillor Groves wants to sort of share the wider vision that she has, not just for Leeds, but also for the Combined Authority in transport.
Thank you, Nigel, and thank you. It's a pleasure to join you all today, and to obviously support the Leeds City Council officers in their vision, and also be joined by our West Yorkshire Combined Authorities in the shared vision for West Yorkshire. Today we're going to set out the vision of the future of transport and how we want to get there, and we really do want to hear your feedback. Our vision for transport is clear: clean and zero carbon, giving us better air to breathe and helping us to tackle the climate emergency. Local, connecting everyone across West Yorkshire with work, play and new horizons. Easy to use, plan and pay for, so that anyone and everyone can leave the car at home. Accessible so that everyone can reach school, work or family and friends. It's got to be reliable, it's got to be fast, and it's got to connect to walking and cycling. Public transport has to be the first choice for people of West Yorkshire. This for us is more than getting from A to B. It's about getting all of us, our people, our communities, our businesses, to where we want to be as a region, and how better transport can help us do that. We've made an excellent start in West Yorkshire. We've had more than 300 million of investment since 2017. We have delivered park and rides, new rail stations, improved bus stations and interchanges, and extensive cycling and walking networks. We're also successful in transforming cities bid, so 370 million is already being progressed at West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and you will start to see that being delivered right across the region. Today we are setting out how we take that forward. We are seeking your views on the West Yorkshire Connectivity Infrastructure Plan, which includes the West Yorkshire Mass Transit 2040. 2040 may seem a distance away, but we have to be ready for the bid of 4.2 million in 2022. We've been working on mass transit led by Tom and Ben for the last 2.5 years. The plan aims to deliver high quality improvements to the transport network system, and over the next 2 decades, it will bring benefits to our region and the UK. It will also help us towards our aim to be net zero carbon by 2038. This is an ambitious plan, and I make no apologies for this being an ambitious plan. West Yorkshire truly deserves a fantastic connectivity strategy, and mass transit is part of that. The documents show how mass transit can improve transport connections for 675,000 people. 20% of those people in the most deprived communities of West Yorkshire. But we have worked with the districts, and the plan includes 35 new housing growth sites, 17 employment growth areas and 5 hospitals, so that all of the major places will be served by public transport. The plans are setting out from the belief that every trip matters. Getting to school, college, nursery, commuting to work, or connecting with friends, shopping, or simply exploring our fantastic region. From your doorstep, the world should open up. You should be able to take your pick from walking routes, cycleways that link into the bus network, a regional mass transit system, and high-speed connections that can take you as far as you want to go. It's my great pleasure to introduce Tom Gifford, Head of West Yorkshire Mass Transit, who will now talk you through our connectivity strategy. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to sunny North Leeds. I'm hoping that the slides are going to come onto the screen in a moment. Fantastic. So I've got a couple of slides to talk you through around West Yorkshire Mass Transit and the connectivity plan. For those of you who haven't met me before, it's fantastic to see you all today. My name is Tom Gifford, and I work for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and I oversee the development of the mass transit proposals. Next slide. I'm here today to talk to you about our truly bold and ambitious proposals for West Yorkshire's mass transit system. This is a really exciting and innovative new mode of transport for West Yorkshire, and it's a key part of our devolution deal. As Councillor Grove set out, we published our first West Yorkshire Connectivity Infrastructure Plan in January 2021. A core part of that plan is the case for West Yorkshire mass transit, and particularly how a bold and advanced low-carbon mass transit system integrates and complements bus, rail, and walking and cycling, for example. All the material I'm talking through today is available on our website. The link is on the slide. We also have a Twitter poll, hashtag WYFutureTransport. Please do take part. We really want your feedback. Next slide. So the connectivity plan and the case for mass transit have been built up from evidence, focusing on those communities of greatest economic need, the key employment and housing growth centres, and the transport environmental constraints across the region. This map, which is on the screen, was published as part of the plans and brings together for the first time those key components of the evidence base into a single picture for West Yorkshire. We also highlight on the screen the 3 big challenges facing our region. Next slide. So our connectivity plan for West Yorkshire has 6 priorities. Walking and cycling to become the first choice for short journeys. The bus at our heart of our plans, with networks revitalised post-COVID. Rail serving trips to the main centres. A new form of mass transit providing that missing link in our transport system. Cars and vans still being important, but as Paul said out earlier, being used less, particularly in the context of the climate emergency. And the focus on international connectivity in a post-Brexit world. The connectivity plan also reiterates the importance of pan-Northern rail connectivity investment, particularly through Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS2, and Trans-Pennine Route upgrade. Next slide, please. Turning to mass transit, we've published the West Yorkshire Mass Transit Vision 2040. It's on the website. The document sets out a bold ambition to make West Yorkshire greener, more inclusive, and better connected. The vision is on the website, and we really want your feedback to it. Finn, can you bring the slides back up? The case for mass transit focuses on how a low-carbon system can support the recovery from COVID, support the transition to a net zero carbon economy, provide seamless integration between modes, and support communities across our region. Finn, do you want to bring the slides back up?
Apologies, Tom. Computer's just crashed. Give me 2 minutes.
We'll give him a moment to bring his screen back.
Do you want to carry on just as best you can for a moment?
Absolutely. So in the plan, we set out a number of maps which set out how mass transit is linked to walking, cycling, bus and rail. And it's really essential that mass transit is linked to that integrated vision of a sustainable public transport system fit for 21st century. Aha, perfect. Well done, Finn. So the vision sets out the detailed corridors within West Yorkshire where the evidence suggests there is the greatest potential case for mass transit to be delivered. This map is the first time as a region we have illustrated that integration between the various modes of transport and the role which mass transit will play in filling those gaps. As part of the engagement which is now open, we are asking you, have we identified the right places to connect by mass transit? Do you agree with the vision? We go on to the next slide. The case will also build on the worldwide market testing into transit technologies, which we held last year, and where we spoke to 120 suppliers of manufacturers, operators of mass transit systems across UK, Europe, China, and beyond. It highlights the need for a blend of advanced technologies, such as new bus rapid transit technologies and new light rail technologies, which will allow us to leapfrog other regions, but still be grounded in deliverable options for delivery. Finally, if you go on to the next one, mass transit will be a new form of transport for West Yorkshire. It will be integrated within the urban fabric of the communities it serves. Our design principles have been shaped by the goal of creating a 21st century transport system. We're proposing 4 design principles: putting people first, our shared environmental and responsibility, creating a better connected region, and also celebrating the cultural and historic assets of West Yorkshire. Finally, on the last slide, having a deliverable phase 1 scheme is absolutely essential. We're acutely aware of the need to learn lessons from the past and accelerate delivery and enable the levelling up of the north. The vision document sets out the roadmap and the next steps, and Ben will now talk us through the implications of the evolution and yesterday's budget. Thanks, and over to Ben.
Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to make a few quick comments, really. This is the last slide of our presentation. You'll see on the slide, and you'll see in the information packs that we've published as part of the engagement, that we've published a timeline. I'd say that's indicative only. I think we would very much like to be at the point where we can start construction on some elements of this network in 2025, and I hope we get there. But I wouldn't say that is a hard and a fast milestone. It's probably the most optimistic timeframe for starting construction. The second thing I'll say is that we haven't set out deliberately an indicative cost because the system isn't scoped and it isn't costed. And of course, we want to hear what you have to say as part of the engagement before we would attempt such a thing. What I would say, though, is that the government in its manifesto outlined, as Councillor Groves said earlier, a £4.2 billion intra-urban fund intended to fund projects such as the connectivity strategy in West Yorkshire. Now, we don't have sole access to that fund, but we would expect it to be the place where we go for some of the funding for this network. And indeed, yesterday at the budget, the government announced its first set of allocations to metropolitan areas to help places begin to prepare the business plans for their propositions. And we've been allocated a little over £7 million to begin work. So I think I'm setting out the kind of positive frame that we do have some funding that will allow us to make progress on this. The final thing I'd like to say is that we're doing this ahead of the May local elections, and we are certainly expecting those elections to happen on the 6th of May. For the first time, those elections will include the election of a West Yorkshire mayor. That mayor will have a set of transport powers and responsibilities. And so we're very much we're looking forward to what the mayor's views are, both on the proposals that we're currently engaging with and what they've put on about mass transit in their manifestos. So a really quite exciting time, a time of change, and a really good time to seek the views of everybody about the proposals that we're putting forward. Many thanks. And now I will hand over to Danny Vaughan, if that's okay, to give us the experience from rapid transit in Greater Manchester.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. So obviously you're here to talk about West Yorkshire, so I'm going to try and keep it brief, although I could talk for hours on Manchester Metrolink, and I often do. So colleagues, feel free to stop me if I'm drifting, because we do need to allow time for questions. So just for those who don't know, I guess just a quick potted history of Manchester Metrolink. It was opened in 1992. It was the first what's called a second generation tramway in the UK, and it was originally just connecting Bury and Altrincham via converted heavy rail lines with a small bit of tramway in the city centre, linking up Manchester Victoria and Manchester Piccadilly stations. That was the start of, I guess, a huge program which we talk about in phases, but actually the idea for it. So I'd encourage colleagues to persevere. Was actually from the late 70s and even through the 1980s. So it took a long time to get off the ground. But the phase one itself was very successful. Expanded to Eccles in 2000, which we called phase two. That was a traditional on-street type tramway. And then phase three, which is really the program we've just come through, opening the Trafford Park line last year, was over 10 years, and it was basically everywhere else in GM, but not quite everywhere. So I'll come back to that in a minute. We now have a 102-kilometre network, the biggest in route miles in terms of light rail in the UK. And actually stands up there in global terms as well. We've got 123 trams. We've got more on the way. Prior to COVID, our biggest challenge was actually was capacity, trying to get enough people on. It was a very successful, very busy network for those who might have travelled on Manchester in the morning and evening peaks. Will appreciate that. We've 99 stops. Just under 1,000 employees. Some of the numbers I'll quote now are before COVID. After COVID is probably a different story and one worth debating. But we were up to 45.6 million passengers. And importantly, or crucially for us in terms of our funding model, which is an important consideration, I think, for West Yorkshire, is we had no operating subsidy. So before COVID, I think, and since 1992, there was no operating subsidy for the Metrolink network. It always generated enough from the fare box to cover at least the operation and maintenance. And I'll come back to the funding model and the contracting models in a minute, because they are important. But essentially, the phase three expansion, which is a £2 billion expansion, was really financed by local borrowings, and 50-50 of local borrowings and capital, i.e. central government grants. So that's a really important consideration. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Can you hear me okay, Tom? Just sorry.
Danny, we're fine. It's coming across fine.
Okay, fine. Sorry. I was just a phone call on Microsoft Teams, actually the rival to Zoom, just as I was speaking to you. So apologies for that. So the contracting models, quite traditional. For our capital program, it was a traditional design construct model, not PPP or anything complicated like that. It's quite straightforward. And for the operations, it's a management contract. So TFGM, representing, I guess, the combined authority in Greater Manchester, we own the assets, we have the revenue risk, so therefore we set fares, we're responsible for marketing, we're responsible for growth, and we set the policies around the network, I suppose. We have the renewal risk, we decide the service patterns, we decide what Metrolink does and what it's there for, I suppose, so in terms of those policy decisions and what it's doing for Greater Manchester, which is really important. So locally, although it's privately operated by a contract, we're the accountable body, so you'll often see us speaking for the performance of Metrolink in the media and so on, and in front of local committees, so we're accountable, and there's a governance structure which supports that. Next slide, sorry, Finn. So just to say, yes, it was a £2 billion investment over that space of 10 years. I think that's the biggest investment in public transport infrastructure outside of London in the last 10 years. And we serve 7 of the 10 local authority areas. So the governance is really important. So the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, I guess, in borrowing and obtaining funding to expand the Metrolink network was really a coming together of those 10 local authorities. And you can see not all the local authorities win in terms of, get Metrolink from there. So we don't have Metrolink in Wigan, Bolton or Stockport. We're still working on that. But I guess it was the recognition of the importance of this whole network and what it could do for the city region, including those areas that don't actually have it. And I think that was really important. The map actually that I show in the picture here it shows the deprivation index. I suppose it's not a nice word, but I guess the Metrolink network does connect some of the most deprived areas in the region. So it does a lot for those local towns, I guess, around the region in terms of access to employment, access to leisure, access to opportunities, really. That's designed to sort of lift the region more generally. I guess, you know, if you showed different things on that map, such as car ownership, the same would apply. And I guess the design and the route selection of our network is connecting, you know, population centres to employment centres. You know, which was a really important objective, I guess, at the outset. And we've also generated some, we've had some regeneration effects. So, for example, Salford Quays, where the BBC is, you'll see a lot of regeneration around old parts of Greater Manchester that have the benefit of bringing Metrolink to them. They're just some examples. And also speaks to that the green agenda, which was mentioned earlier. So phase 3 alone, there's some numbers there, you know, 38.8 million car kilometres from GM roads annually, which is a big number. But I guess what's important to probably say is Metrolink is, you know, fully electric, no emissions, obviously, on the ground, but, you know, we can source that, or at least to the extent you can these days, from renewable sources. So I think 70% of our electricity is generated from renewable sources. Which is, sorry, 100% is from renewable sources, but 70% is carbon neutral. So that does a lot to sort of drive towards that carbon neutral agenda as well. And I guess now that we have a contracting model and you know, a relatively successful network, that now forms the backbone of what is Andy Burnham's what's called the Our Network vision for Greater Manchester, which aims to then further integrate other modes of transport, and it puts cycling and walking again first. That's a policy decision for GM, but also recognise the importance of bus. And I think so we have ambitions to integrate all of those modes a bit more centrally, and just to make it a more seamless experience for customers. So we've still got a lot of work to do, and we're now looking at options such as you know, tram train and extending the Metrolink network, providing potentially orbital routes. Next slide, please, Finn, and then I think I'll finish up. So just things to bear in mind, I think, are success factors of what I think are success factors, at least for the Metrolink network. There's been very strong local leadership, really clear governance across the whole of the combined authority, the ability to make decisions, contracting the balance of risk. So in other words, you know, TFGM as the publicly accountable body can take a lot more risk than we try to put into some of our contracts or different models that have been used elsewhere. And stakeholder engagement is really important. So, you know, in the last 10 years, we've built 60 kilometres of network. That's a lot of neighbours. That's a lot of regions and towns to go through. And it's really important to bring people along with you. And good planning, and I mean that from a project management point of view, but also good transport planning practice. So make sure you get the routes right and spend a lot of time actually on doing this process that you've started now today. That's it from me, and I'm happy to take part in any Q&A that might come up. So back to you, Nigel.
That's great, thank you, Danny. I'm not going to hang about too long for the Q&A. Just let people know that we're capturing all of the questions that you're raising. We will not be able to get through 44 so far as the checklist, but I will try and group some of them, which I've been trying to do now. And I know that Tom and Paul and Finn are very keen to get back to all of the questions in the right way, and we'll feed them into both the Connecting Leeds consultation and also the consultation that Councillor Groves mentioned that's going on for West Yorkshire connectivity, and also to Tom as part of the mass transit consultation. So thanks for all the questions. I'm going to have a go at trying to apportion them out. One of the ones that have come up quite often is places that are missing on your map, Tom. I know you've looked very carefully, but you know, for example, Wetherby's not shown, Castleford isn't there. There aren't any orbital routes. So what's your thinking around how you've been developing the plans and how you've chosen the corridors and areas that are currently within the emerging strategy?
Thanks, Nigel. And it is a really good question, and others on the panel may have a view on this as well. From my perspective, we're talking here today just about mass transit, not necessarily all the other modes, but the plans which we published in the connectivity plan talk to all the different modes. And it's fair to say that mass transit isn't the right solution for everywhere in West Yorkshire. And that's really driven by the level of demand and the level of capacity on some corridors needs a different solution. Or there might be a particularly good rail offer from a particular community already, which could be developed further. So the choice of mass transit and where they've been identified in the map has been driven by the evidence of where some of those key growth areas are, where the key kind of employment sites, housing growth sites are, but also the higher demand corridors where there are particular gaps in the transport system. And so mass transit probably isn't a solution for everywhere, but it's about how mass transit can then integrate with the wider offer, be it bus, walking and cycling, rail, and road as well. So about that blend of different modes being right across the region. And I really would urge people to have a look at the maps which we published. In the mass transit vision, we give more detail on the places to connect as well. So beyond the really high level map, which we've brought up on the screen today, there's much more detail in the mass transit vision around individual places.
That's great, Tom. And I know, Councillor Groves, that you're when we've had our conversations, you're very passionate that this is a West Yorkshire strategy, and you want to reach out to all of our communities. A little bit like Danny said, that we want to make sure our communities are connected to opportunities and jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at the wider connectivity strategy and the different modes that we've identified for each area, and how the modes can actually integrate when you're travelling across West Yorkshire, it's really important that we have got a clear vision of what modes can serve which areas, so no one is left behind. It's really important that we are linked to those employment sites and those housing growth sites. And as Tom said, the mass movement of people, I think when we're doing the first analysis of Leeds to Bradford, where you've got Bradford, the youngest population in the country, we've got to move mass movement of people between those corridors. So each mode will serve different communities, but it's really important that we speak to those communities, take those communities with us, and we seek their views as well. When we were doing the work on the rail vision, there were 18 hours of member sessions from all different parts of West Yorkshire, all political, cross-party, to make sure that we understood really what their people needed. But this is the time for people to feed into the consultation.
That's great, thanks. And Ben, you got your hand up, but also I know you said from your conversation with Treasury, this is really important from a spatial and economic point of view. It's not really just about transport. It's about the economy and how you build places.
That's right. So can I pick up 2 points that the Councillor Groves and Tom made, because I think they bear repeating, because there's quite a few questions, as you pointed out that we've had about why aren't we connecting up such and such a place, or indeed a comment about Pontefract that it's already got a good rail service. So what's in these proposals for Pontefract? It is important that although we're focusing on mass transit today, this is part of a wider, overarching, multimodal approach to transport in West Yorkshire, and it kind of, I strongly agree with them. We need to relate back to the comments that Danny made about the fact that Greater Manchester had to make their project stack up in revenue terms. The business case had to be positive, and that means that mass transit won't be the right solution for every corridor. And Tom's done. He's probably been modest about it, but I think something like 24 different corridor studies, looking at the different and most appropriate modes across all of those corridors. So again, I refer people back to the documents that we've published, and then I think you're absolutely right. The other thing that these proposals are firmly rooted in, and you saw that from some of Tom's maps, but there are many more on the website, is it's rooted in how do we connect people to opportunities, how do we connect communities to the things that they need to not just to go about their business, but to be part of the long-term structural economic growth of West Yorkshire and of Leeds. And therefore, the points that Councillor Grove made in her opening remarks about how many areas of deprivation these proposals touch, the fact that we're deliberately looking to connect big trip attractors such as hospitals, new housing developments. It's very much about what are the connections that we're making It's much less about what's the technology to connect those communities together.
Now, that's great, Ben. I think I'd agree entirely with that. Danny, just picking up on what Ben said, I mean, obviously Metrolink has evolved over time, in an incremental way. How important that has been to the success of Metrolink?
Well, I think you're right. I think we've been quite adaptable over time. We've sort of leveraged from, half of the network is converted heavy rail lines. And arguably there was already a market there, I guess, for rail. But I'll just give you an example, the Oldham and Rochdale line. Some people don't like the fact that we've brought trams instead of, they prefer the old trains. That was maybe 1 an hour. But the fact of the matter is, we're now carrying 5 times more passengers than the rail network did, albeit slightly slower. But I suppose the benefits, I noticed a question in the chat about light rail and what mass transit actually is. The benefits of light rail in particular is that sort of, you can get that sort of high frequency, flexible operation, which can shift a hell of a lot of people. And, it does encourage investment in infrastructure while it's there. And as in, sort of we've seen a lot of warehousing and jobs sort of developed around Metrolink. So I guess, adaptability is key. So, and just coming back to the question of, making it all stack up financially, we've had to be very careful, I guess, over the years. I think COVID will force us to think differently as well, because it's not likely that we're going to get 100% of our passengers back, when restrictions are lifted. The business case that we wrote for the phase 3 expansion back in the early noughties probably doesn't stack up in the same way anymore. Then we have to make that case now on a sort of a region-wide level as to why that transport, that mass movement of people is really important. And so we need to sort of speak to the wider economic benefits that it brings as well.
Okay, that's really helpful, Danny. Thank you. I mean, a question really that sort of arises from that, and I think it's a number of questions that have been raised for perhaps for you, Tom and Ben, is how are we going to assess this in terms of a system? We're going to have to make a business case for it. That might determine what we do and where we do it. And when we do it. So are these realistic time scales, Ben? You were careful about what you said. And Tom, are we sure we've got, how are we going to make that technology choice? And are we sure we've got technology that's got some longevity in there?
Shall I come back first on the realism of the timescales?
Yeah, that'd be really helpful, Ben. Thanks.
I mean, I think, as I touched upon earlier, that we've tried to set out ambitious but achievable timescales. I would be cautious about them because it's very easy, as we've seen with other major infrastructure projects, to get held to a date and a budget too early in the genesis of a project like this. So we don't want to make those kinds of statements until we're pretty firm that we know what's achievable and what's deliverable over what time frame.
And just building on that, I see in the chat there's a number of comments of saying, how confident are we around funding at this time? Is this similar to the past? I think there is and it is well documented, the historic underinvestment in transport in the north and the whole levelling up agenda which sits around that. But it is absolutely essential. But when we do come forward with proposals, there is a strong business case which sits around them at the same time. And to get that strong business case, the first stage of the process is to make sure that we really have consensus around the right places to connect by transit. So are we looking at the right bits of the region for this? And that's what the engagement we're doing now is all about, is making sure that we're looking at the right places for the engagement and listening to what the feedback is. And if there's changes we need to make to tube maps, plans based on feedback, then absolutely we need to reflect on that and come back to that. It will take time to deliver this. These big transport projects, whether you're in the UK or Europe or America, these big projects take time to develop and deliver. And that's to ensure that we can design this in a way which meets the design principles which I talked around, about putting people first, around making sure that it works for the cultural and historic assets of West Yorkshire, and that doesn't happen overnight. We need to make sure due process is followed. And then coming back to your question on technology, the maps, we've highlighted those key places where there's the opportunity for mass transit. At the moment, we haven't determined the actual routes you would take to connect those places. And that's on purpose. That's to give us space to say, are we connecting the right places? So on the maps, is Leeds to Bradford a really important place to connect by transit? And is East Leeds a really important route to connect by transit? That's the level which we want feedback on. And obviously there's route options around, do you go along this road or this disused railway or this existing railway? And that's got to be part of the mix for the next stage. But we don't want to get into that level of design work until we're certain that we're going in the right direction about connecting the right places. And in terms of technology, we need to, the vision document sets out 4 shortlisted technologies, which build on the market testing where we spoke to industry and got industry's feedback on what are the right types of deliverable technologies. And at this stage, our expectation is a blend of those 4 technologies. You'll see in the mass transit vision document, we've kind of shortlisted further what we think might be the right technologies for each individual corridor. And it's a different technology for different corridor depending on the situation. Some might be tram train, some might be very light rail, some might be tram in its true sense, and some are probably better suited to bus and bus rapid transit types of solutions. But at the moment, we're just looking for that feedback on, are we connected to the right places, and are we going, and that will then allow us to get into the next stage of work around route options.
No, that's a good answer, Tom. I mean, it does address a number of the questions there. I think I'd like to go to Councillor Groves, because I think what you've said is we are learning. That's why we've got Danny on the call with us to share some of his learning. But you've worked very hard, I know, to look at the different options that are available. Councillor Groves, you mentioned that you're keen to learn from other places. I mean, there's a number mentioned in the chat. Tyne and Wear and Cardiff, but we've met with many of these people and we have tried to learn the lessons, and I know that you and Ben are very keen to do that. What's your thinking?
I think, Nigel, it's really important that we learn the lessons from the past. We all know on this call that we've been here before, but it's more important that we need to meet the needs of West Yorkshire in the future, both economically and environmentally, because if we don't get this right, then there's a big cost to be paid in terms of people's health and inequalities. We've been to visit Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, and I think it was Manchester who said, you've got to keep going on this, you've just got to keep persevering. The business case will be built, it will be a robust business case. We can't afford not to move forward and have mass transit in West Yorkshire. We simply have to be determined that, we're going to be going for that bid in 2022, and we've got built a robust case for West Yorkshire to have a mass transit system. Wherever I go, I'm always asked about mass transit. Why hasn't Leeds got a mass transit system? But why hasn't Bradford, another big city? Kirklees, Wakefield, Calderdale, all economically performing very well. We're big contributors to the economy, so we need a transport system. People are being failed by us not simply having the investment in the transport systems that's needed.
That's great, thanks, Kim. Ben?
I don't think I've got anything to add to what Councillor Groves said on that one.
I thought you switched yourself off mute just to come in. Let me go to Tom and Danny then and ask them the really awkward question that's come up, and it always comes up, these sorts of questions. So we've got loads of people in cars. How are we going to get them out of cars onto mass transit? Are we going to be successful in doing that? And perhaps, afterwards, Danny, you could share with us whether Manchester's been successful in doing it with their system. Tom, any thoughts on how we're going to achieve that?
So I'll start and then Danny can add to it, hopefully. So the most important thing is providing a high quality, fast, frequent offer, which is affordable and which members of the public feel is a real alternative to the car. So providing that real alternative to the car is absolutely essential to be able to get people out of the car. And that takes time, and that also requires a step change in the type of offer which we have traditionally provided in the past. Danny, does that kind of resonate with Manchester and how the scheme has come forward in Manchester, particularly in phase 3?
Yes, Tom, it does. I suppose it's a few different cars nowadays. People used to say try and get people out of cars because they were polluting, etc. But the speed at which people are moving towards electric cars, actually, does the private car in the future become a sustainable mode of transport? It's a question that comes up a lot now. We've been somewhat successful, but it has to be said, Manchester city centre is quite congested with private cars. I think you have to look at it from a city region, and actually what we haven't been successful in doing is joining up all of the policy levers that we probably could around how attractive and cheap it is to drive right into this heart of Manchester and Park for the day, around trying to convince businesses that they need to be more flexible. One of the positives, I suppose, around COVID, if there is one to be taken, is that people are now thinking differently about how they work. A big challenge for us was trying to create enough space to carry the people we needed to carry during the morning peaks before. That was because everyone starts working at 9 a.m. Everyone it's kind of, everyone goes into the city centre. We think, whilst our passenger numbers won't return because people are more flexible working, one of the phenomena we had seen here was a lot of people moving up from down south, moving to places like Manchester, and who don't actually have cars and move next to the tram network and actually, or have got rid of family cars. So we see quite a lot of people convert to public transport users. Not everybody. We haven't been as successful as we would like to be, but I think that's the key to that as well. Tom, you said this: the fast, reliable, the quality services, but it's also building the services in the right place. So it is targeting those population centres, which makes it attractive. The roads are naturally congested, and if you can provide a fast alternative, people will use mass transit.
Is it okay to come back in, Nigel?
Yeah, and then Ben, if that's okay.
As Danny was talking, there was a couple of other points I thought would be worthwhile bringing up in that kind of space. The first one is what mass transit can do is increase capacity in the transport system and just provide more opportunity for more people to get towards the jobs than can do at the moment. Ultimately, a number of cars can only fit on a single carriageway road, whereas by mass transit, a lot more people can get to a city centre. So it just provides you a much higher capacity system, so more people can travel around. Than if people just travel by car. I think there's also a question about what we want our places to be like in the future. Do we want to be in a world where our towns and city centres are incredibly congested with cars throughout them, even if they are autonomous cars? Or do we want places which are more pedestrianised, where there's more space for walking and cycling? So there's a kind of a more philosophical question about what do we want our places to look like in the future? And do we see cars being that mode which is going to be the main means to get people moving, particularly in the mornings and evenings? And the final thing, which I'll just leave on, is the climate emergency and our commitment towards being net carbon zero by 2038. And Paul said right at the very beginning of the discussion today around transport being the biggest emitter of carbon emissions of any sector in West Yorkshire. If we are to be serious about addressing climate emergency and reducing carbon emissions, we have to reduce car trips.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Tom. That's a really good answer. Ben?
So I'm going to take a slightly different position, really, which I hope illustrates kind of why this engagement is so important to us. And I'm glad that Tom made the points that he did, but he didn't. There's a couple other points that I'd like to bring in. The first is that we're doing this engagement at a time during the pandemic, when there's been lots of speculation about the future of cities and whether they will remain the great trip attractors that they have been in the past. And we therefore have definitely been thinking about our network in terms of resilience against that. That's why it looks across the whole of West Yorkshire. But that said, particularly the more expensive mass transit options, as Thomas said, they are mass movers of people. They rely on there being lots of people wanting to get to the same place at broadly the same time. And I think we will want to take the time to make sure that, as we discussed earlier, the business case absolutely stacks up for these investments. The second point that I would add is that I think the challenge with the private car is going to get greater, not less. It's interesting to go back to the comments that Paul made at the beginning about Leeds' vision. Leeds' vision is that you don't need to use a car. It's not that you can't use a car, or that you can't, or that you shouldn't. And I think that really well reflects the fact that motor vehicles will decarbonise. They might get smaller. Ownership models might change, and so we'll be in a position where people's ability to use clean, efficient private cars, I think, will be something that will still be with us, and congestion therefore will still be with us, and therefore we'll be having to plan our transit and our public transport networks around revised kind of use models and ownership models of private cars, and that is something that we will have to work through as we develop these proposals.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, Ben. I think that don't go away, because I've actually got another one for you, and a tricky one, but really fundamental to this, I'm afraid. So how do we pay for it? You know, there's a lot of questions in the chat about land value capture, or about precepts, or gain share, or fare box. And Danny's touched upon what that means in Greater Manchester. Well, what's your thoughts about that? Is it going to be a bit of everything? I think there would definitely be a set of different funding streams that support this. Danny was quite careful to say that the tram in Greater Manchester pays its operational and its running costs. Doesn't necessarily in all cases enable it to pay back the capital costs. Mm-hmm. And so we will be looking at what the options are in that space. As I said, the intra-urban fund, the £4.2 billion, is clearly something that we would want to do our best to access, and I think that remains the key area that we would be looking to exploit. I think we're definitely looking at those kinds of funds. I think we've, in terms of things like land value capture, that's something that both we've looked at in a West Yorkshire context, and also Transport for the North have looked at as well, in terms of some of the major infrastructure there. And there's two issues, I think. One is that if you do try and extract value out of in that way, you can only use it once. So which tier of government will be trying to extract that value? And the second is that, yes, it might work well in central London and places where there is extremely high demand and extremely high commercial rents. That's not necessarily the case across all of West Yorkshire. And so I think, if anything, it'll have a very limited role in the general mix of funding. But I'll end on a positive note. I think we are absolutely confident that it's very rarely the funding that causes the main problem. I think the other points, particularly on Danny's list, about having strong support, having propositions that communities can get behind, and that work well with the local politics, that's going to be what's really going to make a difference here. Yeah, that's great, Ben. It's a great segue that I wanted to go back to Councillor Groves on, because there are some questions around that, and I know the importance of political will and political support, to make these things happen. And I think that's the real example from Greater Manchester. I mean, one of the questions is, can we be more ambitious and less pontificating? Well, I think everything I've heard today is about ambition. It's about ambition on a West Yorkshire wide level, and to do it as quickly as we can. I mean, Councillor Groves, it seems to me there's very strong political support for this, and the Combined Authority and its partners are working closely to develop a sensible scheme and make sure that that's got a strong case for delivering it. Yeah, I think you're just on mute, Councillor Groves.
That's the second time today. So I think the whole connectivity strategy has really had a great response so far from us going out a couple of weeks ago, because it's what people have been waiting for in West Yorkshire. The 5 West Yorkshire leaders have been behind it, but not only just the 5 West Yorkshire leaders, the whole of the transport Sport Committee, which is cross-party, and the CA, which is cross-party, and obviously we'll be having a mayor joining us soon. It's really important that we are ambitious. One of the things that I think is sometimes difficult, you're going to Manchester, you're going to Birmingham, where they've already started on all of this work and progressed over the years. But actually, from a different angle, we practically had a blank canvas, because we know that we have got to get people out of cars. So really taking the time and getting great detail and making sure that all those communities feel connected by one mode or another, and that all those modes work together to actually help people thrive across West Yorkshire, connect across West Yorkshire, and make that modal shift. We've been able to use that blank canvas to plan carefully, and it's going to be a massive challenge. I think we've got to get 88% of private car at modal switch. But actually, if we get the transport system right with this connectivity strategy, if we deliver, and there is fantastic political support already across West Yorkshire, we're working on transforming our railway stations through transforming cities. The authorities, sometimes, you've got to get the highways people on board, are putting in those rapid bus corridors. They're reallocating space for walking and cycling. We're transforming the front of our railway stations, our bus stations. So we're already starting to create part of that vision. And I think that political leadership has to continue, but it has to be, our members of parliament, we're due to meet with them shortly, but we've met with them before, and there is cross-party support. There was for transforming cities, and there will be for this connectivity strategy and mass transport. So I expect all members of parliament to be on their feet, when we're going forward for the bid and supporting us.
That's great, thank you. We're coming near to the end. I mean, Tom, you've taken a very systematic approach. I've seen and have been worked with you on some of the studies that you've done. I mean, that's what Dan is saying. You need to plan it carefully. Ben's, obviously saying the same thing, and Councillor Gross just said it. How fundamental is that to success?
Absolutely. These things do take time. Making sure we plan it carefully is absolutely what we need to do. I think, as everyone on the call today will be able to kind of see from the plans we've published, it's at a high level, and there's a lot of development work still needed to take place. And this engagement is everyone's opportunity to help shape what happens next. Really encourage people to fill out the feedback forms, take part in the Twitter poll we're doing right now, and give us that feedback so that we can come forward with plans which really reflect the views of the communities across West Yorkshire.
Yeah, and Finn's just announced that we're doing a quick Twitter poll, so let's have everyone tweeting. That would be great. Before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you to all the panel. They've been really thorough and taking on the questions. Some of them a bit pointed. But before you all go, so I'm going to be very positive. We've got a system in West Yorkshire in the 2030s. We're helping to address the climate challenge targets that we've set. If I go through across the panel, I'll start with you, Danny, as the person who's a guest of ours. What's the one thing we really need to do to get there?
Clear vision, I'll probably say. So if you can get somebody shouting about it and making the case for Leeds, in a clear way, and just being able to do parts of it, small parts, and then expand from there, but the same vision all the way through.
That's great. Ben, you're leading the organisation. What are we going to do, and what are the challenges that's going to be?
As Councillor Grove said, we have 5 West Yorkshire local authorities, and the political leadership of which are all working really well, really closely together. We will have a mayor joining that mix. For me, being able to support and work with and help that political partnership, have a clear vision and then see it through, and then for that to survive and prosper and strengthen over time. And it will need to be cross-party for that to be the case. So it's that really strong, clear political vision and leadership that can withstand the test of time. Brilliant.
And Tom, you're charged with leading the mass transit development. What's your big, success point going to be? How are you going to get it over the line?
So I think we need to do two things. The first thing is really listen to what people are telling us through this engagement, listen to the views of communities, different stakeholders, and make sure that we can come forward with a compelling phase one scheme, which is maybe not the whole package initially, but a phase one scheme which everyone can see fits within a bigger picture. So for me, that's what we need to be doing. And the funding, there are funding options out there. We are in difficult funding times at the moment, but there are funding options out there. And if we can make a compelling case, which there is strong support for, then surely the funding will come forward to the right schemes.
Yeah, and I agree. And is there anything that we've missed, Tom? I mean, you've been thinking carefully about this, and obviously we've been talking before the event. Anything we're missing, in the discussion?
So I think there's an awful lot more work to be done here, and particularly around technology choices. I'm really interested in people's feedback on options and what those innovations are. We're doing a lot of work with organisations down in Coventry. Really keen to understand how we can bring together a blend of technologies and come forward to something which leapfrogs other regions.
Yeah, there is that question about longevity. There's that question about the
exactly.
Danny touched upon it. So Councillor Groves, no pressure on the politicians then here at all. You've all been working very hard together, as Ben said. I think we're all supportive, I think, of mass transit in West Yorkshire. I'm looking through the chat and the Q&A. I think everybody is in favour. So, or most people are in favour, I should say. Not everybody, but most people are in favour.
I think for me, Nigel, where I want to get to is that we've taken all the people with us in West Yorkshire, that we've listened to the people, and that they look back when we do deliver with a sense of pride at the transport system that we will deliver going forward.
That's great. I was going to finish there, but I just want to ask Ben one question, if that's okay, Ben.
I thought it escaped.
No, I didn't want you to get away too easily. What else can the community and businesses and organisations in West Yorkshire and Leeds do to support you? Because I think it's a central part of the West Yorkshire vision. So, what else can you get?
Well, I think it's a combination of what Tom and what Councillor Groves have just said, which is get involved in the propositions, and then help us develop them in partnership. Provide support. The business voice will be absolutely critical at times, no doubt, as we go on this journey. And from a community perspective, it's making sure that as Councillor Groves has said, that we are meeting the needs of communities, and that they can see that in the proposals that we're developing, and are supportive as a result of that.
That's great. Thanks, Ben. I'd like to just say thanks again to all the panelists. I think thanks, Danny, for even though you didn't have to travel over to see us, it's great to see you on. Thanks, Councillor Grove, for being so frank, from your place as chair of the Transport Committee. Thanks, Ben, for tackling some of the difficult ones, and Tom, thanks for pulling it all together. It's been a good event. A virtual round of applause to all of you. Questions in the chat is about will we be providing the slides? Will we be providing the transcripts? Certainly we'll be using all of the questions that we haven't managed to get to in detail and certainly all of the chat and comment that we've got as part of the consultation, both for the Leeds strategy and the West Yorkshire connectivity vision and mass transit plan. So thanks everybody for participating. I think it was reached a peak of around 200 people, which is I think the biggest we've had, and I'm sure we won't end today. So thanks everyone, and hope we have a safe journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Nigel, for chairing.
Thank you to the Leeds officers for arranging.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. See you all later. You're right.